Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jessica Caphart. I am the Communications Manager with the BBB serving Central Ohio. We're based in Columbus. So I wanted to take a moment and welcome you all this morning to our presentation on workers' compensation claims. I wanted to also thank our Ohio BBBs for helping get the word out to their accredited businesses on behalf of us in this webinar and Shakely. So I wanted to let you guys know that we are recording this webinar. So if you need to go back and reference it, you will be able to do that. We will have this housed on our trustlocal.org website, and you can also find it on our YouTube page. And I will make sure to get this to all of our Ohio BBBs as well, so they can provide that to you if you wanted to reach out to your local representative. So I wanted to talk also about questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to type those into the question box as we go. We will have time throughout to answer some questions from people, and we'll also leave time at the end of the presentation for Shelley to answer any questions you may have. There will be a few poll questions in this presentation as well, so please feel free to go ahead and answer those. We will be kind of taking some polls, getting your feedback and your input, so we'll be talking about those in real time. And if you have any other questions or need any other information, please don't hesitate to send me a chat or shoot us a question. And with that, I want to introduce Shelley Hensley, who is the Workers' Compensation Operation Manager with Shakely. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Shelley.
Good morning, everyone. As Jessica said, my name is Shelley Hensley, and I am the Operations Manager here at Shakely. I oversee the state fund and self-insured claims management teams. I've been with Shakely for a little over 20 years now. I can say I've seen a lot over the years, but I have to say that this year, 2020, has to be one for the record books. Earlier this year, when we all started dealing with COVID and its impact in the workplace, many TPAs, law firms, government agencies, they were presenting a lot of information on COVID and how to handle it in certain situations within the workplace. What are we now, about 7 to 8 months into dealing with this pandemic, and Shakely has seen multiple workers' compensation claims. We thought it would be a good idea to review how the BWC is handling these cases, these COVID cases handled or filed as workers' comp claims. I just received a report a few weeks ago from the BWC that showed there have been 1,246 COVID claims filed in the state of Ohio. Now, most of these are in the medical or emergency sector. However, there have been a little bit over 300 now outside of those fields. I can say Shakely has started to see more and more claims outside the medical field as well. So you have an employee that has filed a workers' compensation claim for COVID. Now what? We'll go on to slide 3. First, the BWC is going to do an investigation into the COVID claim. Like they would do with any other injury, occupational disease, or death, they're going to gather as much information that is available and make a determination. The BWC is typically notified of a claim when an accident report or a first report of injury is filed. This is usually done by a medical provider, but it can also be filed by an injured worker or an employer. Now, throughout this presentation, I'm going to refer to individuals who file claims as injured workers. I know technically they're not injured, but it's a really tough habit for me to break. So just so you know, I'm referring to them as injured workers. The BWC, like I said, is going to gather as much information as possible. And one of the important things they're going to gather is medical records. This is going to include the COVID test. They're going to want any treatment records associated with the claim. And if the injured worker was hospitalized, they're going to want those records as well. They're also going to send a questionnaire to the injured worker to get more detailed information and get a perspective from them on how they contracted COVID or how they think they did. We'll go over this questionnaire in just a little bit. The BWC is also going to reach out to you as the employer for more information, and they are also probably going to ask you if you are going to certify or reject the claim. As with any claim, I recommend you only certify claims you are absolutely sure are work-related. This goes for any claims, not just COVID claims. If there are any red flags that you're aware of, if there's a risk that the claim will be a high-costing claim, or it's a lost time claim or a potential to go a lost time claim, I really recommend you reach out to Shakely or your TPA or legal counsel to discuss with them before you certify or reject. We'll get into a little bit more of the employer investigation later on in this presentation as well. Let's move on to slide 4. Now, this is some of the questions that the injured worker will receive from the BWC with the questionnaire. This information will be used by the BWC to determine if the COVID case should be allowed as a workers' compensation claim. Some of the questions include, what are your normal work activities? Are you a peace officer, firefighter, emergency medical worker? Now, some occupation or job duties are definitely going to be looked at differently. For example, you could have a nurse working in a hospital with direct care of COVID patients. That's going to be looked at completely differently than, let's say, a landscaper who works outside and is alone a majority of the time. So the BWC definitely wants to know what kind of field of work you're in. Some other questions they're going to ask: how do you believe you were exposed to the coronavirus? When was the exposure? What symptoms have you experienced? How long have you experienced the symptoms? And were you tested? If so, where, when, and what were the results? This is going to help the BWC determine a timeline. Does the time they develop symptoms correlate with the time of exposure? Some additional questions include, have you received medical treatment? Again, when or where? This is going to help them gather those records that we discussed. They're going to ask, have you traveled outside the country within the last 3 months? I think they should be asking about any travel, but for now, I think the questionnaire is just asking outside the country. They're going to ask, do you know anyone in your personal life who has the coronavirus or has been exposed to the coronavirus? And they'll ask, have you attended or been associated with meetings or gatherings of groups of 10 or more individuals? Things like school, church services, trade shows, athletic events, things of that nature. These questions are helping the BWC identify what risk, if any, were there outside the workplace. Using my previous example of the landscaper, let's say we have a landscaper who worked in the yard of someone who ended up with COVID. And maybe he did speak to that person briefly, but they were outside. It was only for a few minutes. He also happened to be on vacation in Florida around the same time. There could be a question on where his exposure actually took place. Was it at the job or while on vacation? That is what the BWC is going to try to determine. So let's move on to slide 5. So the employer investigation, this is where you come in. As the employer, you should gather as much information as possible, especially if you are disputing the COVID case as work-related. What information do you have on the employee's exposure? You need to start creating a timeline from your perspective. Were there any other employees within your workplace who tested positive? If so, did they work together? Were they around each other for more than 15 minutes? Just because you have 2 positive cases does not mean they are related. You can have people in the same company that hardly ever interact. So it's important that you document this information. Are you aware of any recent travel of your employee? Now, the BWC is asking about outside the country, but as the employer, you should document if you're aware of your employee traveling anywhere within the country as well. How about a second job? Do they work somewhere else other than at your work site? What about their hobbies that you're aware of? Are they in a softball league? Do they belong to a motorcycle club? What about church? Do they go to church regularly? Document that information. Also, something that I think is really important for you to document is what safety precautions are you taking at the work site? Are you requiring masks in the workplace? Are you enforcing social distancing? How often is equipment sanitized? The governor, on a daily basis, is saying exposures are happening more in social gatherings than in the workplace. So I think it's really important that you document the safety precautions, because that's probably a reason why we're not seeing a great number happening at the work sites. Before, I also mentioned to be careful about certifying claims. It is very important before you certify any claim that you discuss with your representative. You will need to consider all aspects before you certify a claim. What's the financial impact? Again, we'll discuss this a little later in the presentation as well. You need to review all information you obtain through your investigation. It's okay to tell the Bureau you're not ready to certify or reject. You can simply say you're still investigating. You could reject now, but later certify. The BWC is going to move forward with their decision whether you certify or reject. So don't feel pressure to do that. Okay, let's move on to slide 6. So what is the BWC considering once they gather all their information? Well, they want to know whether COVID was contracted in the course of employment, was it peculiar to the employment, and employment created a risk of contracting to a greater degree than in the general public. Now that's a mouthful. So basically what they're looking for, was it more likely to contract COVID in the workplace or in their regular life? That's basically what they're looking for. Okay, we can go on to slide 7. Once the BWC has gathered all their information, they're going to review it and make a decision to either allow or deny the claim. At that time, they'll mail out the order, and the injured worker or the employer has 14 days to appeal that decision. If appealed, the claim will go to the Industrial Commission, and the first level is the district hearing. Now, currently, all hearings are being conducted over the phone. Prior to COVID, hearings were in person, but they moved to conducting all hearings over the phone once COVID hit all work sites. It's likely that these hearings will be continued to be conducted over the phone at least till after the first of the year. It could go longer. I know hearing representatives and attorneys prefer in-person hearings. I think they get more information out of employers and injured workers at that time, but for now it will be over the phone. The hearing officer will review all information in the file, and then both parties will have a time to state their case. Once everything is reviewed, the hearing officer will then publish a decision. They usually publish it in about probably 1 to 2 days, and then either party will then have the option to appeal again. They have 14 days to appeal. If appealed, the claim will go to the second level hearing, which is the staff hearing. This also will be a hearing over the phone, and it will be basically the same process as the district hearing. Once the staff decision is made and published, again, either side can appeal. Now, an appeal to the staff hearing is really requesting a third level hearing at the commission. And typically the third level hearing is refused. I would say about 99% of the time, the commission refuses to hear at the third level. But at that time, either party has 60 days to appeal out into the courts, Court of Common Pleas. Okay, going on to slide 8. As I said earlier, there are about 1,246 claims filed. About 40% of those claims have been allowed, 50% have been denied or dismissed, and 10% are still pending. Now, Shakely has managed claims going through both the BWC and the IC hearing process, and I thought I'd give you some examples of the claims we've seen and see if those attending the webinar today can guess how the claims were decided, if they were allowed or not. Jessica's going to help me out here, so hopefully we don't have any technical difficulties. She's going to show a poll. She's going to show a poll question, and you can answer yes if you think the claim is allowed and no if you think the claim is denied. So we have the first question. An office employee with COVID-like symptoms was exposed to a coworker who tested positive for COVID. This employee, however, had a COVID test, but the result was negative. Was this claim allowed? So either yes or no. Yes if allowed, no if not. Again, it's an office employee, was exposure because he was exposed to a coworker who tested positive, but this employee had a test that was negative. Do you think it was allowed? Yes, allowed, yes or no?
Okay, and Shelley, if you're good, we're going to go ahead and close this one out. We have 89% voted no and 11% voted yes.
Okay, most of you are correct. The claim was denied. Never say never, but I would assume to allow the claim, the BWC will want to see a positive test. All right, on to the next question. A nurse was exposed to COVID through a patient and a coworker. Both tested positive. She, however, did not develop symptoms or test positive for COVID until 15 days after exposure. Was this claim allowed? So yes if allowed, no if not. So we have a nurse who worked with COVID patients who tested positive. Her coworker tested positive. However, she did not have symptoms or test positive until 15 days after her last exposure. Allowed or not?
We had 64% say yes, and well, it's kind of wavering here. We're about 62% say yes and 38% say no.
Okay, so you are correct again. The BWC did allow this claim. The employer appealed because they questioned the timeline. However, it did end up being allowed at hearing. And I think it's mainly they're looking at that environment, probably put her at more risk. So they're saying that's probably where she got it. On to question number 3. So we have a grocery store worker who contracted COVID. Multiple employees in the store also tested positive, and the store was even closed for several days because of it. I think it even made it on the news. This employee, however, also belonged to a church where there were also multiple cases, positive cases. Do you think this was allowed? Again, a grocery store worker, so not in the medical field, contracts COVID. I don't think there were multiple people within that facility that tested positive. I'm not sure how much interaction he had with them though. But again, the store closed down because of it, and he belonged to a church where there were multiple cases. Do you think it was allowed, yes or no?
And on this one, we have about 73% saying yes, and it's fluctuating a little bit. 71% yes, and 29% say no.
Okay. Currently, the BWC has denied this claim. The injured worker has filed an appeal, and we are waiting on a hearing date. Unfortunately, this gentleman did pass away, so his family is the one filing the appeal. I really think this could go either way at hearing. We don't have a hearing date, so I can't give you a final decision, but these are some of the claims we're seeing outside of the medical sector. BWC denying and then it going to the Industrial Commission. The next question. A nurse, again, takes care of a COVID patient. The nurse has symptoms but never went and got a COVID test. She later went and took the antibody test, which was positive. Was this claim allowed? Again, a nurse took care of a COVID patient. She had symptoms, but she does not have a COVID test saying positive, but she has an antibody test. What do you think? Allowed, yes? Denied, no?
It looks like the majority right now is saying no. We're at about kind of fluctuating back and forth a little bit. About 67% say no and 33% say yes.
Okay. The BWC has denied this claim. The injured worker has appealed, and unfortunately, again, I don't have the hearing results yet. My gut's telling me this is going to be denied at hearing. I really think they're going to want to see a positive test. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. The final question we have here is a forklift operator. He contracted COVID. He works closely with a lot of people within the warehouse. He removes trash and scrap generated at all production lines. Several people in the warehouse tested positive. This gentleman got very sick, was in the hospital for several months. He is okay now. But do you think this claim was allowed? So it's a forklift operator in a warehouse, works with a lot of people, basically touches everything within the warehouse. Do you think this claim was allowed or denied?
And right now we have about 84%, 85% saying yes, and 15% say no.
Okay. So the BWC actually denied this claim, and it went to hearing. The injured worker appealed, and the IC did allow it. And the hearing officer noted several things that I think went into them allowing it. One thing they noted is they considered him an essential worker. he contracted COVID during the stay-at-home order, and he was considered an essential worker and had to go to work, so he did not have the option to stay home. He testified at hearing that he was working long hours during this period and did not engage in any outside of the workplace social activities. He also had a doctor provide the COVID diagnosis and relate it to the workplace. And another factor was the employer actually certified this claim. The employer wanted it allowed, so they submitted a statement in support of the claim. So the IC did allow this claim. Obviously, neither party appealed. We were wondering if the BWC legal department would appeal it, but they did not. So this claim did remain allowed. So I think that was all for our questions. We will go on to slide 8 and the financial impact. So currently, the BWC is applying all costs of these claims, medical, compensation, and reserve to the risk. So COVID claims will impact your rates like any other workers' compensation claim. Now, some of these claims are very costly with multiple months in the hospital, and we've also seen several death claims. Claims that occurred earlier in the pandemic with a loss date prior to June 30th of 20 will impact rates for the 2022, 2023, 2024, and 2025 rate years. Claims with loss dates after 7/1/20 but before 6/30/21 will impact rates 2023, 2024, 25, and 26. Now you have seen some of you may have seen in the news that other states have removed the cost of these claims from employers' risk and wonder if Ohio is going to do this. At this time, there's been no announcement, so we need to assume that costs associated with these claims will be applied to employers' risk. Is it possible that Ohio could do this at a later date? Yes. But again, I don't want to create false hope. I think employers really need to count on this cost being applied to their risk. So it is really important to consider the potential cost if these claims end up allowed. But you also have to consider what if it gets denied in workers' comp and it applies to your health insurance. We have had some employers that actually want the claim allowed in the workers' comp system because they do believe he contracted it at work, but they're also worried about the impact to their health insurance. So that's something that employers should consider as well. All right, we'll go on to slide 9. How can Shakely help? Well, I've touched on some of this throughout the presentation. It's important for employers to review each of these claims, their potential costs with Shakely, their third-party administrator if you're not with Shakely, or possible your legal counsel. Remember, discuss any claim where there could be a potential of high-costing claim, any red flags, or if the claim has the potential to be lost time. Some things that Shakely is doing for our clients include reviewing all the information in the file and assisting with the certification or rejection. Now, we can't tell you what to do as an employer, but we can help you evaluate the information so that you can make an informed decision. One of the big things that we do is provide projections on the financial impact to your workers' compensation. It's important to get those numbers so you know what you're dealing with. A claim happening today is not going to impact you for many years down the road, but when it does hit, it's going to impact for many years. So you need to have those numbers handy. Shakely will also file any necessary appeals on your behalf. We gather all the information for the hearing. We go after extra medical records if we need to. We'll obtain contrary medical. This is where we can send the medical records out to an independent doctor and get their medical opinion on the claim. Especially if there's some contradictions within the file, we might want another doctor's opinion. We can also represent employers at hearings, and sometimes we might recommend you obtain legal counsel or use your attorney at hearings. There are certain things the TPA can't do, like cross-examine an injured worker, and this might be important in claims like this, especially if you're trying to establish there was a risk outside the workplace. We might want to have an attorney there to cross-examine or ask the injured worker questions. So just in summary, if you're going to remember anything about this presentation, this is what I want you to do. Make sure you review all claims filed against you thoroughly. Do not certify a claim unless you're absolutely sure it's work-related, and lean on your representatives to help you through the process. that pretty much sums up what I wanted to go over. Are there any questions?
We do have a few questions. And if
Okay.
you will just bear with me for one moment.
Sure.
Okay, so one of the questions is, what if an employee is a primary caregiver to an elderly parent? The caregiver is an essential worker but cannot go to work as they cannot risk the elderly parent getting ill as they are literally in the end of their life. Will this employee be able to get workers' comp while caring for their parent?
No, because that's not a workers' comp claim. There are other, this is kind of outside my scope, but my understanding there are other things that could help that employee, but it doesn't sound like this employee has COVID, and if they were to get COVID, it doesn't sound like it would be related to the workplace.
Okay. Another question is, how long have you seen until an appeal is heard by the IC?
Typically, it's usually around 4 weeks, but during this time, it is taking a lot longer. We're seeing like 6 to 8 weeks, maybe even a little longer.
Okay. And then we had another question about whether or not we are able to email this PowerPoint. And
I think
I'm
we
going to
are.
defer to you. And what I can do is I will actually add this PowerPoint into the handout section. So you should be able to grab that from there. If you just bear with me for 1 second, I'll get that loaded. And then, Shelley, another question we had was, are any claims getting filed accidentally, more so by providers, if injured workers speculate they may have contracted it at work?
Sure, yeah, and a provider can file claims. So sometimes claims do get filed when the injured worker doesn't want them. And if I remember correctly, we had 50% of the claims that have been filed either denied or dismissed. So we are seeing claims being dismissed that have accidentally been filed. Now, if it's filed, it would be the injured worker that would have to request the dismissal. Employers can't request it.
Okay.
One other thing I wanted to point out, I didn't see my contact information on the presentation, so I think we are going to follow up with an email after this. So if you have any questions or you need anything, please do not hesitate to reach out to me.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, I wanted to let you know that you can always reach out to your local BBB as well. I did go ahead and upload the presentation, so you should be able to grab that if you'd like to download that and take it with you. And just as a reminder for those who maybe didn't hear it at the beginning, we have recorded this and it will be available to you to refer back to. So I'll review that when we're wrapping up as well. We had another question come in, Shelley.
Sure.
Doesn't covering COVID claims open up the liability for all infectious diseases in the future, such as flu?
Good question, because you're correct that typically flu-like viruses are not covered in the workplace unless there is like an exceptional reason why you're more at risk. I'm hoping not, but I think it is definitely a possibility. I think just because this pandemic is so publicized, I think I'm hopeful that it won't in the future, but I think it's a possibility. Currently, these cases should probably not be related at the work site unless there is some higher risk at the the work site than in your personal life. But yeah, I think it's a possibility.
Okay. We had another question. Does a pre-existing condition affect claims in any way?
Not for COVID. State fund employers can get a handicap on lost time claims. And what a handicap does is if we can prove a pre-existing condition that's recognized from the Bureau, by the Bureau, delayed the employer's recovery, we can file for a handicap. So let's say we have an employee who gets this, it becomes a workers' comp claim, and let's say they had cardiac issues or diabetes, and we really feel that delayed their recovery, we can request a handicap. And at Shakely, we have an entire team dedicated to doing that for all lost time claims. We're always looking for that potential.
Great. Another question was, since the Bureau of Workers' Comp is allowing some claims for COVID, will they be allowing claims? Oh, I think that we had a repeat. Will they be allowing claims for the flu in the future? After all, both are a virus infection.
Yeah, I don't think it will be for the flu, but I think if you get to a pandemic type situation, a new type of illness, I think those probably we could go down this road again. I don't think it'll happen for the flu, but I never say never in workers' comp. 20
Mhm.
years, if I've learned anything, I don't say never.
Another question we had was the BWC allowed a claim with a positive test but no medical. Have you seen this, and what was the result of the appeal?
I have not personally seen that. I'm kind of shocked that they did that, but again, it's possible. I would imagine I would want to see those records. So as an employer, you might want to consider appealing that because I would like to see what the doctor is relating it to. That's one where you might want to get a second opinion. And you definitely want to investigate the risk level at your work site. So I would definitely reach out to your TPA if it's Shakely Us and just discuss the merits of the claim.
Another question was, will this lead to employer mandated vaccines for employees?
Well, that's a little outside my scope. I think some sites like hospitals and things will probably have some kind of requirement. I can't see it in the private sector. But again, I'm not sure where that goes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that looks like most of the questions that we have. If anybody else has another question, please feel free to go ahead and type that in really quickly. I do want to just kind of remind everybody that, again, we've recorded this webinar. It will be available on trustlocal.org. We can also make sure that all of the Ohio BBBs have it. So if you want to reach out to, your BBB in your area, they will be able to provide that for you. And I want to say thank you very much to Shelley. Shelley, I didn't know if you had anything else that you wanted to cover or say, but it doesn't look like we've had any new questions come in. So
Okay, no, I just want to say thank everyone for their time. And like I said, if you need anything when you get the email, just feel free to reach out.
Okay, and actually we just had one last question come in, Shelley, if you have a minute for it.
Sure.
What required precautions help protect employers currently?
What required precautions?
Yes,
Is that what you
help
said?
protect. Yes, I'm sorry. What required precautions help protect employers currently?
Well, I think if you have mandatory masks when you're around people, I think if you're sanitizing equipment or providing the supplies to sanitize, if you're enforcing social distancing, let's say you're closing areas of congregation of your employees, things like that, I think that will minimize the risk in your work site. And like Governor DeWine said, they're really not seeing a lot of exposure in the workplaces. They're really seeing it in small gatherings. And I think as an employer, if you present the information that you've implemented all these safety precautions, and then the injured worker has some things outside in their personal life where there might not have been those safety precautions, I think you can create doubt in the hearing officer's mind that it's work related.
Okay. Well, thank you, Shelley. You have been very helpful and informative, and I want to thank everybody for attending and the great participation with the polls and all of the questions. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and say thank you and have a great rest of your day, and we'll be here if you need us. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.